Hey, curious people, you're listening to the Self-Led in Bed podcast, where we explore our fascinating internal sexual landscapes and discover our authentic sexual selves. I'm your host, Patricia Rich, a certified internal family systems and sex therapist, coach, and creator of the Self-Led Sexuality model for healing, pleasure, and empowerment. I've spent the last 30 years helping people to develop fulfilling relationships with themselves and others. If you're ready for some warm, smart, and juicy conversations, me and my parts invite you and your parts to get cozy and settle in. In today's episode, I speak with Tammy Sollenberger, Certified IFS Consultant, author, and podcaster. I couldn't have had a better first guest on the show, and we talk about our connection, how we found IFS, and how it really feels to become self-led, and especially self-led in bed. Hi, Tammy. I am really honored that you're here with me, and I want you to know that listening to your podcast, The One Inside, was such a expansive and important way that I learned about all these different applications of the internal family systems model, IFS, and that your warm demeanor and interesting conversations and willingness to share stories of your own parts had such a big impact on me and are an inspiration as I set out on this podcast. And now we know each other in a bunch of different ways, but it was pretty cool to first get to know you through you as a host.
The first time I met you was at Cape Cod Institute, where I was very impacted by you because it was my first time with IFS, and Dick was presenting at Cape Cod, and you were young, like everyone there was kind of older, and you sort of looked younger, and you had this dark curly hair, and you wore these cute outfits, and you were just like 2 rows behind me, and every time you spoke, I just was really drawn to you. And so you were like, how was there 50 people there? And I just remember, I don't think we ever had a conversation or anything, but I knew who you were. And I think I remember seeing you at the conference and be like, oh, that's that woman that was like right behind me at Cape Cod. So it's just amazing that's like from there until now, just our relationship and all the things that you and I have done together and our friendship. It's amazing that from there to this moment, it just feels pretty big to me.
Wow, Tammy, listening to that, I have chills going up and down my spine, and listeners may hear me say that at these moments when I just feel the awesomeness of something, a connection, a truth, a something like points meeting. I feel like this journey with IFS, which is really a many layered, personal journey, a professional journey, a social journey, a spiritual journey. It's so many things that there's times when like a cycle, like some sort of circuit comes back to where it started, or there's some kind of confirmation in a way of something, and I feel it in my body. I just get sensations in my body. So it's amazing about that first meeting. And I so appreciate that your podcast, and you were the first person to invite me to ever be a guest on a podcast. And that was in 2020 when I had just been invited to teach the IFS Institute online continuity program, which was like a big break for me.
Yeah, that is a big
I had
break.
presented at the conference a few times, at the IFS annual conference a few times. And I had, after my last presentation, had this opportunity and was invited to teach this 4-month module, which was just a huge step from where I was, like private practice therapist, synthesizing these ideas for myself. exploring things in my own life and trying to put it together, for a presentation, sort of scared to death that this stuff would sound utterly insane. I would freak people out. I would humiliate myself. And I would feel like, okay, I tried. Now I can go back to my office,
Mhm.
and then this is a little circular, I guess, but when I first presented at the conference, I did a 3-hour workshop called, I think it was something like Befriend and Transcend Your Sexual Story. And it was there was so much energy in the room with it. People were so energized by it that it was this huge confirmation again to keep going. So anyway, this opportunity arose to teach this community, and it was the when I was asked to do this, we didn't know we were about to have a pandemic. So it was at the conference in 2019 that I got this invitation, and by fall of 2020, which is when I taught it, we were pretty well into the shutdown, the peak of the shutdown. So, and that was when you invited me. I looked it up before we met today. So September of 2020 was when I was on your podcast. And I have to tell you that people still find me through that. I did a more recent episode as well in
Mhm.
conjunction with the book Altogether Us.
Mhm.
I've written articles, I've presented at different places. They all have been impactful, to use your word, in different ways. But being a guest for an hour on your podcast is still bringing people to me. People are still learning about me, and more importantly, the work and using IFS to address sexuality from that. And that really brought home to me the power of podcasting.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's such a part of my journey that it just felt perfect when I was thinking, who would I want to talk to as the first guest?
Mm.
If Tammy was willing to do this, it would feel so good in my system. And you were so enthusiastic, and I'm so entirely grateful.
Oh yeah, I mean it was a yes for sure. I mean it was a yes. And Patty, yeah, I mean I think and I've heard that before. The podcast is it's we're on our sixth season and people will say that like, the one episode I did with you, I'm still getting clients from that. Or I have somebody that was like, I didn't have to do marketing for my program that I do. I didn't have to do it for a whole year after I did your podcast. And I love that. There's parts of me that are like, I love that because um I think we all, right, it's us and our message. It's us and IFS and this message that is, like you said, I think this happens for me too, where I sort of get, like I said earlier, like so lost in doing that I forget about this precious gift of I have parts and I am a self and a self in me. Like sort of this message that's such a precious gift. And we can get so lost in the doing of it, or maybe I can, that I kind of forget, wait a minute, there's a spiritual practice here. There's a psychological practice here. There's healing here. There's so much here for me, for you, for the world, not to be dramatic, but it feels like it's that dramatic. And I lost what I was saying, but
Well, I want to just say it doesn't sound dramatic because this is an international community. It is the
yeah,
world. And
yeah.
maybe now we kind of jumped in, but I wonder now if you'd want to introduce yourself, and we're talking about your podcast.
So yeah, I found IFS, I think the way a lot of people find IFS, it's sort of just kind of, it was, I was already a therapist, already licensed therapist for years. And I heard about this new model that was talking about curiosity. And it wasn't new it was 20 years old at the time, but it was kind of new in the Boston area, I guess. And in this workshop I went to just started talking about, what if we were more curious? And I thought, yeah, I mean, I did cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, and where that's not how I'm approaching myself. It's not how I'm approaching my clients. And what if I approach myself with more curiosity, like why I do what I do, and what's happening with my relationships, and what's happening with my behaviors, or, um, and, this workshop I went to just started talking about, what if we were more curious? And I thought, yeah, I mean, I did cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, and where that's not how I'm approaching myself. It's not how I'm approaching my clients. And what if I approach myself with more curiosity, like why I do what I do, and what's happening with my relationships, and what's happening with and it sounds so silly now, but like it never dawned on me to bring curiosity to my clients, sort of this open-hearted curiosity. I was like, no, like let's challenge, challenge thoughts, and where does that belief come from? And
Mm,
um, which is so funny because it's not me at all. Like I'm not that way. So I think that's what, causes burnout and a lot of like
mm,
um a lot of energy loss. But anyway, so I learned about this model that way. And then I got the Cape Cod booklet in the mail, like 2 weeks later, that was like Dick was coming to Cape Cod. And I was like, okay, that's really weird. And my husband at the time was super great, super supportive, and was like, let's go. It'll be really fun. My son was 3 at the time. I remember we brought his little tricycle, and Frozen was the big movie, and we rented this cute little house, and he would ride his tricycle, and we watched Frozen like over and over and over. And he rode his tricycle all around this house. It had one of those cool like hallway loop things. And I'd go to IFS in the morning and then come back and do the beach in the afternoon. And it was, learning about IFS and having the experience of working with my parts. And that week I connected with a part of me that felt this loss of my mom when she married my stepdad when I was 10. And I was like ugly crying, sobbing. I had never kind of known that or admitted or let myself feel it.
mm,
And it was unbelievable. It was just it was unbelievable, like life changing
wow.
experience of, wow, this is in me. And it could explain so much of how I felt in our relationship. And there was these younger parts of me that felt this grief, and then other parts that never let me feel this grief.
Mm.
Um,
I wonder if,
so yeah,
I'm sorry to jump in
go
there,
ahead.
but just for a moment, for people who might be newer to internal family systems, just to ask you to say a little more about having a mental understanding that, oh, the divorce or the stepfather coming in impacted my development. Would that be okay to just say a
Of
little more
course.
about the difference between that and what you experienced in this first retreat?
Of course. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I knew that, it was just me and my mom. My dad was in the picture, but I just saw him kind of every other weekend. But it was just me and my mom. My mom was super young, and we had a really close relationship until I was about like 9 or 10. And my stepdad came in. My stepdad's really nice. He's a great guy. And they're, still married, and he's wonderful. But it was still this, so there's sort of a head knowledge experience of, yes, it was just me and my mom. And in my mind, we had this super cute, lovely, amazing relationship. And then she married him. He had an older daughter. They got pregnant with my sister immediately. And so all of a sudden it went from just me and my mom to me, my mom, an older child, a younger child, and the stepdad. And we moved to a new house. And so there was this head understanding of like, I could tell you the story like a reporter. I could report you the story of what the narration of like, this is what happened. There's no feeling about that. You could say, Patty, you could have said to me, like, gosh, that had to be really hard. And I would have been like, it's okay. I don't know. I don't know. I guess maybe just sort of a head understanding of how hard that was. Um, but when in IFS, what we say is when I went inside, when I, turned my attention inside and connected to the parts of me around that, there was this huge amount of grief, right? It's like I connected to the 9, 10-year-old me who felt this loss of my mom, my life, my the way of life I knew it, and my mom, and the relationship that we had when it was just us. It's never been the same after that. And so I could feel that, I could experience that, my body could feel that, not just a head knowledge but an experience of of grief. And yeah, heart felt like a heartbreak. It
Mm,
felt like a heartbreak to my
mm,
younger parts of me.
mm. Thank you for sharing that. And I can resonate there with different scenarios, but like the difference between remembering something and then actually feeling like I could bear witness to the part of myself who went through something difficult, although in part of my work with sexuality is also helping people bring the same kind of attention to parts of themselves that actually experienced joy and pleasure, which can also be something hard to allow into the system. Um, but part of this process that I think makes it a little different than there's a lot of things that are similar, and then some things that I think make it unique compared to other processes of introspection or therapy or growth, are somehow holding this mature, spacious, compassionate presence with that young part that's still
Yeah.
holding those things, right? And not to jump in
100%.
too much on your
Yes. No, that's
story
perfect.
and
No,
your
it's
introduction.
no, that feels totally fine. And we can talk about it feels really fine right now to do that 100%. So I wrote this book so I have a podcast called The One Inside, and I wrote a book called The One Inside 30 Days to Your Authentic Self, which is kind of like IFS for dummies. It's small. It's a personal, like you can, if you're new to IFS or if you're wanting to work with your parts in a really simple, accessible way, it's a fantastic book for it. And I don't think there's any other IFS books like it, because it really is, short chapters. We just use one word a day to really teach the model. At the same time, it walks you through how to get to know your own parts in your own system. And so one of the chapters is called withness. So the idea of witnessing. And so this is such a good point that it's like, yeah, my true self, was witnessing my 10-year-old have this grief. And so I could be with her as she felt this grief. So yes, I was crying and, sort of ugly crying and sobbing. Yet there was this space that I could be with her. And so that's what feels so different is I can be with her so that afterwards there is this there's so afterwards I felt amazing, right? I felt tired and I felt out of it a little bit, but I felt more connected to myself. I feel more connected to my mom. Our relationship changed so much after I did this work. It wasn't like, yeah, there are parts of me that are mad. When I got to know the parts of me that are mad at her, or parts of me, I can be with them. So I can be with the parts of me that are mad at her. I can be with the parts of me that are grieving. So me, adult self me, being with those parts, they then have me. So they don't need to, the other part that comes in and says, kind of has to shove them away. So if another part that says, okay, you're not allowed to be mad at mom, you're not allowed to feel grief. Actually, you're fine. Like I have a big I'm fine part. Right. So for me to be with the sadness and the anger and the grief, I can also be with the part that says I'm fine. And be like, it's okay, right? I'm here. We don't have to be fine. I'm here and we're good. And then there's more of a connection, more connection between me and my parts, and then more connection between me and my mom.
That's beautiful. And what a wonderful personal sharing. Happened to be that first week that we encountered each other. So I just love how we're circling through all this. That's such a great illustration of the the way this inner system. Sometimes I think the name of this model is a little confusing. It's developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz. And I don't know if you know this, Tammy, but when I first encountered Dick Schwartz and IFS was in the early 1990s. And I had just finished social work, my master's in social work at the University of Chicago. I graduated in 1991, I think. And I worked in a community mental health center in Chicago. And my colleagues were all going through these family therapy postgraduate training programs. So, for those who are unfamiliar, in social work school, and I think many different kinds of counseling professions, you do your formal schooling, but then afterward, people do a lot of ongoing training to really deepen their skills in all these different modalities. So at the time, I wanted to do more training in family therapy. I was working with families. We were doing multiple family groups, like a bunch of families together and doing groups with them. And this, there's a lot of interesting things we did there. But anyways, I went to this place in Chicago where it turned out that Dick Schwartz was on the faculty there. It was the Institute for Juvenile Research. And he wasn't my main instructor, but he did, I think, one day come in and teach. And at the time, I didn't quite get the model. And it was so early, even in the development of the model, it didn't, it wasn't quite as fully developed as it is right now. But I had a supervisor at my job at the community mental health center who kept talking about Dick Schwartz, and parts, and people have parts. And I didn't really get it, but I picked up the notion of like a little bit about multiplicity, which is one of the ideas here, is that it's normal that we all have different sub personalities or different kind of discrete consciousnesses in us, and that that's not a sign of pathology, right? That that's normal, and that when we're reasonably supported in our lives, those work fluidly together and we're not so aware of them. But when we hit bumps, either just regular life bumps, or for some of us, really severe trauma and disruption in our lives, then those parts get more dysregulated. And, I think of it kind of like organs of the body. Like when our organs, we have these different organs, like we're one person, we have different organs. And when they're healthy and they all kind of work together, we're not walking around thinking, oh, I have a kidney, I have a liver, right? But if we have an issue with any of them, or we take in something toxic, then we tend to be more aware sometimes. So,
That's a great example, right? I think about pain, right? I have I'm having some back issues, and so I'm not aware of my back, right? I just go and do and do and do. I'm very aware of my back right now,
mhm.
right? Like
Yeah,
so, right? People say that, right? If you have, you're not aware of your pinky toe unless you slam your pinky toe into something, and then you're
exactly.
very aware of your pinky toe. So I
Yeah,
love that. That's great.
yeah, yeah. So, boy, I'm meandering here. So, okay, so I got into when I first encountered IFS, which was at that time with my supervisor at the Community Mental Health Center in this program I was in. And then I sort of went on my merry way and did family therapy, and I worked with couples, and I had adopted a bit of this parts language. And as I was working with couples, I got more interested in their relationships, and sexuality was something I was pretty comfortable talking about. It just was something that I had always been interested in, cared about, that I'm sure I'll say more on another day about all the things that have contributed most likely to me becoming a sex therapist. But when I decided to really pursue sex therapy, I encountered someone on one of the listservs for my sex therapy work who presented a case, and I responded using some parts language. And he said, oh, you're an IFS therapist. And I said, no, I'm not. I heard of it 20 years, not 20 years ago, but it was a long time before, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And this was Bruce Hersey, who I want to credit, who some
Oh
people know
yeah,
in the IFS
yeah.
community. He fished me out of a listserv.
Wow, I love that.
And I was kind of in the market for a new skill, a new, model or technique to work with at that point. And so he has a sex therapy background and IFS background, and now he's doing a lot with EMDR and IFS integration. But at the time, he was offering an intro to IFS weekend, and I stepped in then, which was in 2011. No, 2013. 2013 was when I started with IFS. So, how did I get onto all of that just
That's
now?
great though. That's great. Just how you met Dick and how it's
Yeah, how
been
I heard
this
about the model and multiplicity and all this
and had
stuff.
started using parts language, which
And
works great for people with
mm,
with working with sexuality and sex therapy works great. Like IFS works great with that.
absolutely, absolutely. So, yes, I had, I think, in my first weekend, I guess parallel to your introduction of that first Cape Cod Institute, when I did that first intro to IFS weekend, started out like, oh, this is, an interesting model. This is, I'll take some notes and maybe I'll have a few exercises I can use with my clients. And then I got like gobsmacked
Mm,
meeting one of my parts. It
mhm.
wasn't a memory. All of a sudden, this really feisty little girl who loved to learn and understand things was like popped, you know, it's like popped off the page. Like when you watch a cartoon or something and it's like something just pops out of the page and has its hands on its hips and starts talking to you. Like she was just there. And that was sort of the first time I feel like I was like, oh, it was much more real and three-dimensional than in my psyche. I knew I could discern reality. Like I wasn't, that's sometimes people are worried about that. Like it sounds crazy or it sounds, I don't know
Right,
what.
right.
But I was very oriented, but I had this presence and I was able to hear things from her and not tell her things.
Yes. Yes. And that's a huge, I love that. First of all, yes, we want to just admit it can sound really weird and
Mhm.
really woohoo and weird. And we all have felt that way and we all have those parts. And I love that. Because someone the other day was like, okay, I'm telling the part this. And I was like, well, what does she want to tell you? And that's a big shift of like, can I be open and curious and listen to what the part wants to tell me? I
Mhm.
think that is a little bit of a shift too, that people think, okay, well, I'm going to tell the part, right? Like if I'm going to
Mhm.
get to know my
Mhm.
busy, feisty part that likes learning, and so I'm going to tell her, okay, here, no, 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 we're actually going to open up and just sort of see what she wants to tell us. Like what's going on
Mhm.
with this sweet little part that just popped up out of the page, and let's see what she wants to tell us. It's a
Mhm.
different feeling. It's a different experience for
Yeah.
sure. So I'm a therapist in New Hampshire, and then I'm a certified IFS consultant. So if people are looking to get certified, we could meet together, or if people so I can do that and help with certification. But also I love helping therapists learn the model or practice the
Mhm.
model or do their own work, like when they're just like, whether they're waiting for a training or they're just interested in IFS but sort of not sure how to do it or what to do. I love that. Like
Mhm.
I think that's where I'm really good at, like kind of dumbing it down and being like making it simple and
Mhm.
being like, this is, I think, because that's kind of where I came from. Like my parents were 16 when they had me, they didn't graduate high school. Like I came from that. And so I'm like, let's just make it simple for the rest of us so we can really understand this beautiful model. Like, let's simplify it and then help people really embody
Mhm.
it, like simplify it and embody it.
Mhm. I love that. And I've learned so much listening to you. I have to tell you, well, I have two things going on. One is I have a part, and is it okay for me to share my reaction to one of the words you just used? So, and I honor your parts and your story and how you get to that word. And I have a part that when I hear you say dumbing it down is like, whoa, like that is when you can distill something into its simplest elements. To me, that's wisdom. um so I just have a part that just wants to say, for us, when you're able to do that, it's the opposite of dumbing it down, but it does make it accessible to more people, which is a wonderful gift. So
Thank you. Yeah, that's for some reason I'm like, ooh, that's hitting something. Yeah, I think it hits something that makes me feel like, well, yeah, not to be too personal, but yeah, I guess it hits a part that's like, well, I'm not that smart, right? Like, was
mm,
not, I was really social. Not a big surprise, but I was more social, um, and never really thought of myself as like smart. And so I think maybe there's a part of me that feels comfortable and that like I'm over here in like the dumb corner. And then part of me is like, that's terrible to say that about myself or even say that about anybody. I would never call anybody else dumb. And I don't think that I'm dumb at all. But but yeah, there's something about that. There's some parts around that for me for sure.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, welcome. what
Thank
we say
you.
a lot is welcome to those parts, right? And sometimes there's a
Mhm.
moment where we notice our parts and we can turn toward them and really listen to them. Sometimes, at least for me, I bookmark them like, oh, this
Yeah.
is what actually Dick Schwartz coined this term, a trailhead, that this is something, this is a path I could take to learn something or see something. But we don't take every trail we pass, and we don't do it every, we can make choices about when, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
And
good. Thank you for that. That's a gift, right? With somebody, and I love trailhead versus trigger. And I think I talk about this in my book too. And we talk about this that, right? It's trigger feels like first of all, that's this awful word, right? Trigger. And we can have parts like, oh my gosh, I'm triggered. Oh, sort of we have parts around that. Like I'm activated and then I'm activated. And then like parts of me have to be sort of not activated. Like, no, 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 don't be activated, don't be triggered versus a trailhead is an invitation, right? A trailhead is a beautiful path. Like, oh, there's a
mhm,
trailhead. I wonder where it leads, right? Like,
mhm,
oh, I'm curious about that. And like, there's curiosity there, and there's also adventure. But there's something that feels a little better. Like when I think of it as a trailhead of like, oh, okay, I'm invited. You've invited me to turn towards these parts around intelligence or around kind of where I come from versus where these parts think that where everybody else comes from, or even, um, yeah, like even saying like, my book, like being IFS for dummies, like I love that. But I think there's probably some parts around that, right? Like I couldn't write the textbook or I couldn't write the, big book with millions of words. Like I couldn't do that. So instead of feeling shame about that, or instead of feeling embarrassed about that in this moment, like I think at first I feel some shame and embarrassment. But when you say trailhead, I can think, oh, okay, I can take a deep breath. The shame and embarrassment parts can sort of rest or relax a little bit, and I can think of it as an invitation to turn towards those parts and just see what's going on, what's
mhm,
happening with them, and then I can separate from them a little bit of what we call unblending. So I'm unblended from the shame, I'm unblended from the embarrassment, and now I can see a trailhead that's like, oh, I'm interested to explore that. That
mhm,
feels better in my whole system.
mhm. Wonderful. Thank you again for sharing your vulnerability and your process. It's the best way, I think, to help people understand what this is, that unblending word too, which is sort of like stepping back a bit from the activation. And in terms of trailheads, and this might be a segue into talking about sexuality and being self-led in bed and um this model that obviously I think we both have quite a passion for is often applied to lots of different areas. Often it started as therapeutic models, so people were bringing IFS to sexual. I'm sorry, not to sexual, to trauma, which could include sexual trauma, of course, and healing. And over time, I've gotten very curious about all the ways that this way of knowing ourselves, knowing our parts, knowing our self energy, this kind of core, authentic life force energy that we all have. How is that relevant to the experience of sex and a sense of ourselves as sexual beings? And that's what I've gotten very interested in. And as I've brought this work forward, it's resonated with a lot of people who are looking for a new way to know themselves sexually, to navigate this very complex sexual world that we're living in, and whether that's a personal individual experience of who people are as sexual beings or self pleasure, a sex life can be a solo experience, and also navigating relationships with other people and the political environment we're in, depending what kinds of bodies people have, what gender identity or sexual orientation or body size or skin color or religious community they might be involved in. People's parts, just have the job of helping us navigate this world. And it can be a very complex world. And of course, we add in biology, right? Because our bodies respond to things in different ways at different stages of life. We're navigating higher sexual interest, lower sexual interest. Who are we supposed to like? Who are we not supposed to like? It's too much. I'm not supposed to feel this horny. No, something's wrong with me. I'm not feeling any sexual interest and I'm supposed to. Like, there's just so many things. And so my hope is that we can open conversations, just opening conversations. So here, but like you helped open the conversation with your podcast when I was a guest on there, to open that conversation between us and to your listeners. And I'm wanting to offer even more opportunities and depth of conversation with other people that are in the community, and kind of what's the intersection of this thing that you do and the thing that I do, and also to open conversations within, amongst people's
Mm.
parts.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I love it, Patty. I'm super excited for you. I'm super excited for the IFS community and just for the podcast world in general, because you're bringing something, and just by you asking the questions. I mean, I think I would just invite listeners just to see what happens when you just said what you just said, right? Like you just said, like, okay, am I horny? Am I not horny enough? Am I horny as much? Not as just that. Even just saying the word horny, like, oh my gosh, are we allowed to say that? I don't know. Like, so, I mean, you're just saying things that we can just notice how are my parts reacting to what Patty just said. Right,
mhm,
right, because those parts, I can turn towards those and get to know those parts that are just reacting to the word sex.
mhm,
Like, what happens for me when I think about sex?
mhm,
Oh, right, there's going to be but that's going to be activating with just
mhm,
that alone. So for you having these conversations, what an amazing invitation for trailheads, for people. Instead of doing, I think what we do is we just don't talk about it. Right,
mhm,
like couples therapy. Like, how many couples therapists say, well, what's happening in your sex life? Right, are
mhm,
we even asking the question?
mhm.
Or not even for couples therapy, right?
Right,
Individual therapy.
right,
Like, how often
right.
do I say what's happening with your sex life? I don't know that I say
Mhm,
that, right? If they don't
mhm,
talk about it, I'm not talking about it. Okay, what's that about? So I think that's, yeah, I'm just super excited. And yeah, just noticing, yeah, I can see, you can feel the energy in me right now. Like,
mhm,
just like, oh,
mhm.
oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah. Which
Uh-huh.
is great, which is great.
Yeah. And um, we were talking about trailheads, and often people are choosing as trailheads to focus on things that are um, just a break from your normal way of feeling or being, right? So
Hmm.
the way you're describing the energy you're feeling, um, that could be a trailhead, right? That's another way to find a trailhead. I'm just noticing a lot of energy around this thing, or I was sort of in the stasis and now my mind is racing, or right. So that might be
That's
another
great.
way to notice.
It's a great trailhead, and it's a great embodiment, right? Like, you're sort of
Hmm.
noticing the energy of your body. And we can't
Hmm.
think about, I think, sex without thinking about how connected I am with my body or disconnected. So am I aware of, yeah, oh my gosh, I'm talking really fast and oh, there's energy here, or actually there's no energy and I'm actually not here. I'm sort of, there's a numbness here. Like, can we just begin to pay attention to that? Because that just helps us tune into our bodies. And many of us have learned to not tune into our bodies. And so then when you're like, am I horny or not horny? It's like sort of like, I don't even know what that feels like anymore because I'm so disconnected from my body.
Hmm.
So parts really help. Learning about parts and learning to connect with our parts really do help with those first sort of onion layers. Like, I can't even get to the horny because I'm either not allowed to have sexual feelings, or sort of all these beliefs or burdens or sort of other layers before I can even get there. So then I can pay attention to, like, what is happening. I notice a belief, or I notice an activation, or I notice I'm not even connected to my body, or I don't even know what I feel like in my body. Great, but that's a place to start. Like, we don't have to start with horny. We can start with all those parts that are on top of horny. I'm just going to keep saying the word horny.
Or underneath horny.
Yes. Ooh. Patty is always good for saying the, like, sexual thing and making everybody giggle.
That's another part. I have a wordplay part that
I love
was a
it.
super nerdy, like since I was little with words and making little double entendres, whatever, however
You're
you're
very
supposed to
good at
say
it.
that word.
Yeah.
But yes, so many important points in what you're sharing there. Number one, and this is something I do really think is so important, is just inviting people to start where they are. Just if you've listened to this conversation up to this point, something is keeping you here, right? So just maybe even noticing that what's interesting, what's coming alive, what's frustrating, what am I hoping you're going to get to soon? All those things can be clues, right, to finding parts. And when it comes to sex and sexuality, and I'll tell you, I work at this between these two communities, right? So there's the IFS community and the world of therapists, more general type therapists, or just everyone who isn't a sex therapist. And then I work with sex therapists, um, sexual educators, different people that are on the sexological side of things. And those people are often really interested in learning more about IFS. So their parts aren't necessarily as reactive to the subject matter, but maybe they haven't had the invitation to really intimately get to know their own parts.
Yeah.
And so wherever people are, there can be, people who are very sophisticated sexual connoisseurs, do all kinds of, very, special sexual things, but maybe still haven't had a chance to really relate with, in that back and forth way, the different parts of themselves. And one of the things that IFS offers, where I think the multiplicity lens is so helpful, is like, so often people will have a part that drives their sexual life, and it may trample other parts of themselves. They may have a really adventurous part, but it doesn't really want to slow down or even know necessarily that there's other parts that aren't ready or aren't on board or don't feel like they got to say, what they wanted. And so this idea of, one of the concepts that seemed so useful to me was this notion of internal consent. This idea that the more we know our parts, like a consent process is often addressed as an interpersonal process. Someone asks someone else if it's okay to do some kind of sexual thing, and that person says yes or no, or maybe. And that itself is hard enough to do. And a lot of people feel awkward and don't even do that, right? But as we get more curious, and I love your emphasis on curiosity, we could get curious about, well, what do I want before I answer? Do I even know what I want? Do I feel like I can take a pause? Do I have the right to pause to see what I want? And then the more I've gotten to in tune with my body, like you said, many of us are very challenged to even notice our bodies. But sort of the self-led in bed idea here is that the more we know our parts and the more we know our bodies and the more we have a respectful reciprocal relationship, it opens more space for that self energy to lead, this sense of our wisest, um, calmest self. And calm doesn't mean boring. I always want to say that. So anyway, I'm, as I can do, get rather passionate talking about this stuff, but that's sort of the idea, is how this model can help people to access more self energy around sex and sexuality. And whether that's doesn't depend on what you're actually doing. It could be useful during sex, but it also can be useful just knowing you're going to be sitting with a client and talking about sex, or maybe you're a parent and you need to talk to your kids about it, or you're buying clothes and there's something you want to buy, but you're not sure you would wear it in public. Like, how do you sit with yourself, and embody who you are? And
Yeah. I love that. Well, I think you do such a great job of just explaining that. And I think it can be, you know, like starting with a part of me that doesn't even let me pause, right? If
Mhm.
somebody invites me to do something and then I just immediately say yes, like, well, can I pause? Whether that's a sexual thing or whatever that is. And can I get to know that part that says, no, you just have to say yes all the time, or you have to say no all the time, or so there's so many parts of us involved in what you just talked about that it's like can I offer a little bit of separation and then get to know all these parts of me just one by one by one and see where that takes me.
Mhm.
Whatever happens when I think about um right. So for people that don't know IFS or aren't familiar with IFS, just think about that activation, or that, like, what happens to me when I think about something that, so if we take it out of for the sex therapist, we take it out. I always say, like, just think about something that bothers you about you, like something you don't like about you. So think about, like, I don't like that um, you know, don't get up early enough. I want to get up earlier, right? I don't get up early enough to do the things that
How
I
do
have a
you
morning
know?
routine.
How did you know?
People actually have a nice morning routine that they like. But so there's a part of you that wants a morning routine, right? There's a part of you that wants a morning routine, get up earlier, do whatever that your morning routine is, but you're not doing it. And so there's another part that's not doing it, that has a different idea. And so can you just notice that there's a part of you that wants a morning routine and another part that wants something different, whether it's that you want to sleep in, you want to rest, and that might be hard to know, right? Because I just noticed I want a morning routine and I'm frustrated, but there is a part that wants something different because you're not doing it, right? Like, so can I, and then there's me, right? So it's a part that wants a morning routine, there's a part that doesn't, wants to sleep in, and then there's me. And so can I just begin to notice these different parts? And then there's parts that are around that, right? Parts that are aggravated that I don't have a morning routine, parts that are frustrated that I can't put a routine into practice. Right? There's lots of parts around the table here when we talk about a
Mhm.
morning routine. So what's it like to notice that you're here and you can invite in who has something to say, right?
Mhm.
Who has something to say about a morning routine? And what is it like to stay at the head of the table, to stay at the head of the table and invite in with a lot of compassion, a lot of curiosity, all the different parts of you, all the different voices and feelings and sensations around morning routine?
Mhm.
That's a great place to start.
I love that example. And it's kind of perfect for self-led in bed, right? It's about laying in bed.
I love it.
All right. And there can be, I
Yes.
like to say, there can be a lot of us in bed. You know, for some of us, that's an external reality. And for some of us, it's an internal reality that I just feel like my bed, I mean, getting up in the morning, I was just saying to my husband this morning, like, just, I wish I was better at getting up in the morning. My whole life, I'm not a morning person. So when I'm laying there, there's just these different parts that are around me.
Yeah.
And we're not alone.
We're not alone in bed. That's
So,
great, Patty. Yeah.
yeah. As I'm getting started on this podcast, I have to confess to you that last night we were on a long drive home. I wasn't driving at the time, and I was looking back to try to find your earliest episode of your podcast because I know you've been doing it for 6 years. And I think my parts that are starting doing this are just looking for companionship, maybe, because there's lots of parts here launching. And I don't know if you want to share anything about what it was like for you to launch, and maybe my parts will be listening.
I love that. Yeah. And Patty, I guess I'm curious if it feels okay for you. I would love to hear about the parts of you. Yeah. So I'm
Mhm.
happy to share that. And I guess I want to invite you to, if it feels okay to talk about your parts since this is your first
Mhm.
one, you're launching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really curious about the parts of you. I think that for the parts of me, um, and I still have parts that don't, um, that was just really focused on guests, like just focus on guest, make it
Mhm.
like, does it feel good between me and the guest? And wasn't focused on who's listening. It was more like, I'm going to talk to people about IFS. It'll be fun. Like, so I guess my parts were like, um, okay, this is interesting. This is just what came to me. It's sort of like, I didn't want to pay attention to the impact, right? Like there's some parts of me like, no, 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 we're not paying attention to the impact. We're just talking to our friend, right? So I'm just going to talk to my friends, right? So I'm just going to talk to my friends about IFS because that's fun. And that's what I'm going to focus on. So I think that really helped. That really helped because I don't, because people were like, and I think I have a lot of, I know we're not talking about the Enneagram today, but I'm an Enneagram 3, which is a personality type, and I'm a 3. I'm gonna just get stuff done. It doesn't have to be perfect. It really just has to be good enough. And so that also was really helpful. Like I can put stuff out there and it's sort of like, it just has to be good enough. It doesn't, so otherwise I would never put anything out there, right? There's no way, so I think that was really helpful to have parts that were just sort of like, it's good enough, get it out there, and I'm just talking to my friends. So those were the parts of me. I think parts of me that were scared were pretty exiled, even now.
And there's some functionality to that, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, my protectors are like, that sounds like a good strategy.
It's a great strategy. Yeah. I was just on
Yeah.
somebody's podcast and they are 40 podcasts behind because they were recording so many and not putting them out there because they had so many parts about putting them out. 40. I'm like, there's no way that, no, like, that's, you got to work with your parts around.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
But what about you, Patty?
Yeah. Well, yeah, earlier on, I was feeling kind of the moment and feeling very appreciative of the opportunity. But I do now have some other parts coming in that maybe want to try to please my imagined
Right.
stadium full of listeners, which might be like two friends.
Yeah.
I don't know. Um, but it's interesting talking about sexuality, and my parts have to navigate this a lot because there's parts that want to stretch the norms around talking about sexuality and to put more out there and challenge some of the boxes that we tend to have that exile the topic of sexuality. And then on the other hand, I have parts that don't want to overdo that. And um, there's parts that feel like as a woman to talk too much about my own sexuality or to be sex positive. It feels like there's stigma still, as much as I'm mostly beyond that. I have parts that don't want me to, they carry those cultural legacy burdens, that if a woman likes sex or is sex positive or talks about sex, then there's some kind of, proverbial scarlet letter or something like that. So there's like a little bit of legacy burden there around that. Um, and so, yeah, so maybe those are more like there's some professional parts that kind of want to keep it in that professional realm, but like stretchy. And then I have parts that don't want it to be not sexy enough or, God forbid, boring. That's something my system really dislikes boredom. And so I have parts that are like, well, we better get to steamy pretty fast. And we should be talking more about, very specific, sexual things. And so those parts, it's just interesting. So I think it will unfold with time, how much self disclosure I will choose to do, how racy we are. It actually feels good as I'm naming these. I feel my system kind of softening a bit. This is that unblending thing, right? Just sometimes naming the things. Like I feel my breath deepening a little bit. And I know my parts heard you talking about getting over perfectionism and just doing things. And that's been a bit of a battle for me. Had this idea for about 3 years to do this.
Yeah.
And I would say, yeah, there's parts that um, there's something about, I like to read people, I like intimate interactions. I like to connect with people. So something like this, it's sort of similar to writing. It goes out and I don't get to have that interaction. I can't correct what I feel like is a misunderstanding, or you know what I mean? So there, it's a real letting go, so
Yeah.
I feel ready for that, but it's a notable letting go for my parts that sometimes like to have an iron grip on the
Yeah.
steering wheel.
I love that. And I think it's such a great example of what is it like just to name things, because we have parts that are so afraid if I name it, then it's going to take over, then it's going to flood me, then it's going to become too big. And so we have parts that are just have exiled and pushed away so many things that just name it, like just even naming something, it feels like, oh, that's going to be really uncomfortable. But then as soon as you name it, it's almost like it lessens its hold on you. And I
Mm-hmm.
can see you just sort of like, okay, that's all it needed to happen. I just needed to
Mm-hmm.
name those things.
Yeah.
And I actually feel like that's just such a gift that you just gave your whole
Mm-hmm.
system, just naming
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm. And if I could follow up there, what I'm noticing now is once I name those, I feel like like that, what I think of is almost like a river coming through of all of the like courage and confidence and commitment. And like I have a real drive to do this, and
Yeah.
some for reasons known and unknown. There's so much suffering that people endure, not having anywhere to go with all of the burdens they accrue around this stuff, that we can accrue around this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also a hope that this kind of liberating this energy in ourselves of passion. And it's not only sexual passion, this passion could be to create things and do things in the world, not only in bed, but also passion in bed, that's a way that we restore ourselves. We talk about self-care and all, connection and all these things, but that this energy, like I feel this energy coming through that's like, it, it's like, yeah, like use your voice. Like the world needs love, the world needs connection, and the world needs touch and care and fun,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's important, so it's just interesting how the unblending brings out sort of more of that powerful self
Mm.
energy.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah. And that self energy, that curious, compassionate, we use those C words, but I know in you have your own words that you use
Mhm.
for self
I
energy. I wonder if it would be
do.
fun to list those right now.
Yeah, thank you for bringing those into the conversation. And it's true because Dick Schwartz identified these 8 C words to help people recognize, when am I blended with a part and when am I in self energy. And those words, maybe together we can remember all 8: calm, compassionate, creative, clarity, connection,
Curious.
curious. I can never quite, there's one more. There's always one I miss. Calm.
Confident.
Calm, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I got curious, how do we recognize self energy in the context of sexuality? And what sort of came to me are what I call the 6 S words. So, am I feeling safe, sensual, spacious, sensitive, steamy, and satisfied?
Great. That's great. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so those are great words just to even notice what happens when you say those words. Like what happens when people are listening to those words? How do their parts, their systems respond just to those S
Mhm.
words?
Mhm.
And people have always joked about sort of the ninth C word, and choice could be another C word. I mean, it is a C
Mhm.
word, but it could be another C word of
Yes,
self energy,
absolutely.
right? Like, and I don't often feel like I have choice when it comes to sexuality or my sex life. It's sort of, I feel like either I have choice depending on what my partner wants or needs, or I feel like I
Mhm.
have choice depending on my body, like what's happening in my body, or messages that I got, or we call them burdens that I got from growing up. So all three of those things create in me no choice, feel a feeling or a sensation or a belief of having no choice. And so I love the idea of choice when it comes to
Mhm.
sex.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, and I know we'll wind down here shortly, but um, and this will be something we'll be talking about more on other episodes, is that it's a privilege to be in a position where we have choices related to sex and sexuality, and it's pretty new and it's pretty fragile.
Yeah.
Because depending on who we are and if what our gender is, what culture we're in, what our sexual orientation is, all those, what the political systems are that we live within, often people don't have choice. So I just want to appreciate that not everyone is equally endowed with the external choices, and that you know we still have we can still be with our parts, and there's can be tremendous pain around not having choice, but we can be with our parts regardless of the outer world. So that's something, but just wanting to really appreciate what you're saying, that I think it's the choice that makes a difference in pleasure and having a sense of empowerment.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. So Tammy, so grateful for your companionship, your support, your sharing, your beautiful system, and um, how we've interacted today feels good in my body, and it feels good in my heart. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Patty. And I'm super excited for you and for everyone listening, and excited what's going to happen. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you. And is there any last thing you might like to share about how people can contact you? I'll put it in the show notes, but just for folks who are listening,
Sure, you
please
get my
share.
website is tammysollenberger.com. And so if you go to my website, you can download a free get to know a should part of you. It's a meditation, like a get to know a should part of us that says you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And my website has everything. So I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I've got a couple insight timer meditations, my book, my podcast. So the website is sort of one place to get everything. So
Mhm.
tammysollenberger.com.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty.
Thank you for listening to the Self-Led in Bed podcast. Check us out at www.patriciarich.com/podcast, where you can sign up for a free guide to the 6 S's of sexual self-energy. Until next time.